Welcome back, everyone. 13 after the hour, and today in Behind the Headlines, I want to go into something that I'd like to call the myth of racially equal pot use. And it was inspired by a tweet that I saw from the ACLU of Minnesota. And it read, quote, "Blacks and whites use marijuana at the same rate, but blacks are 11 times more likely to be arrested for possession in Minneapolis," end quote. And this has been a solid talking point for marijuana reformers for a few years now, but is it true? Now, the fact that African Americans are arrested, jailed, and sentenced more for drug crimes, including marijuana, that's not in dispute. That blacks are disproportionately targeted compared to their relative share of drug users in society is also not in doubt. But that first part, do black and white Americans really use marijuana at the same rate? Well, it depends on how you look at it. If we ask Americans, have you ever used marijuana? We find that 44% of all people aged 12 and older have tried it. 44%. But it works out to just under 49% of all non-Hispanic whites and just over 42% of all non-Hispanic African Americans. And these figures are all according to the 2013 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. So by that measure, lifetime use, whites are more likely to have smoked pot by a large margin. But how valid is that lifetime use statistic? I mean, that's going to include the 21-year-old black person who's smoking marijuana right now, along with 68-year-old former President Bill Clinton, who didn't inhale some 40 years ago. And certainly, the 21-year-old black person's more likely to face an arrest than, say, Bill Clinton. And using marijuana in one's younger years is more likely to lead to law enforcement attention. Still, if you break it down by age groups other than ages 12 to 17, more whites have used marijuana in their lifetime than blacks. But let's concentrate instead on recent users of marijuana, and let's define recent as someone who's used it this year. Among people who answered that they used marijuana in the past year, 14.3% of blacks versus 13% of whites were annual tokers. But if we break it down by age, we find that for teenagers aged 12 to 17, annual marijuana use rates were about equals. It's 13.9% of blacks and 13.3% of whites. But in the college age demographic, age 18 to 25, 35% of whites toke compared to 31% of blacks. Then by age 26 to 34, the child rearing age, black use is up to 27%, white use is down to 24%, 24.5%. But then after age 35, whites retake the edge in pot smoking. And there's a similar pattern if you look at current monthly use. Overall, monthly speaking, 9% of blacks and 7.8% of whites used marijuana. At age 12 to 17, it's about equal, 7.4% black, 7.2% white. When you hit the college years, whites overtake blacks, 21.7 to 18.8. In the child-rearing years, blacks overtake whites, 17.9 to 14.3. But after age 35, whites overtake blacks, but are just about statistically dead even. So if you want to boil all the numbers down, you could say that over their lifetimes, whites are more likely to have smoked pot than blacks. Or you could say, judging by annual or monthly use, blacks are more likely to smoke pot than whites. But if you narrow it down by age, college age and middle-aged whites are more likely to smoke pot than child-rearing age blacks. And the college age and middle-aged whites are more likely to smoke pot, but the child-rearing age blacks are more likely to smoke pot. So it just depends on where you look at for ages and where you look at how often someone's smoking pot. But another way to look at it would be to restrict it to just the people who are under age 30. People who are under age 30 make up more than 3 out of 4 marijuana arrests. So if you're just looking at young people under age 30, whites are more likely to have used marijuana in their lifetimes, annually, and monthly. What's also interesting is that black marijuana users are more likely to use only marijuana, while whites are more likely to have also used other illicit drugs. Over their lifetime, over 1/3 of whites aged under 30 have tried a drug other than marijuana, compared to over 1/5 of blacks who tried other drugs. And among current monthly users, whites are over 50% more likely to be using a non-marijuana drug than blacks. 6.4% of whites are using a non-marijuana drug compared to 4.2% of blacks. So if you really want to boil it down, in the most relevant data sets, if you're controlling for the age where people are most likely to interface with law enforcement, whites are far more likely to be using drugs and or just marijuana, either way, in combination or marijuana alone. Whites are more likely to be using drugs than blacks in America. So that makes the disproportionate punishment of blacks for marijuana and drugs even more reprehensible. It's bad enough that in Minneapolis, black folks are 11 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana if they're using at the same rates. But as I've shown you, white people are more likely to be using marijuana, especially in the younger age demographics, than black people. So that makes that 11 times even worse, proportionally speaking. We've got to become aware of this sort of disparity and make sure that in our own talking points, we don't give away some of the strength of our argument. To say that whites and blacks use marijuana at the same rates actually shortchanges how badly the black people are being treated.